Spoilers for Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. You are currently being warned. We are in the middle of the warning. That has officially been the warning. Right, so I wanted to make sense of Emperor Palpatine's return and figured others probably wanted the same. So this is how I believe it happened over the course of the Star War. So around 35 years prior to the events of the film, Emperor Palpatine had a contingency plan in the event of his death. Well, he actually had a couple. I want to talk about one specifically, and then we'll talk about another one later. So what he'd done, he'd secretly established a cloning facility on Exegol, a hidden Sith planet in the unknown regions. When did he do this? How did he do this? Well, in the words of our resident Star Wars walnut woman,
a good question for another time.
So after Darth Vader pitched him down the Death Star shaft, he was able to transfer his consciousness into a new, albeit flawed body, kept alive with Sith alchemy. It's never explicitly stated in the film how he did this, though we have had examples of Darkseid users transferring their consciousness into objects in the comics, but presumably he just made it happen and can do it, seeing as his idea was to also jump over into Rey's body. It's from the planet Exegol, though, that he was able to reach out through the Force in order to influence events in the galaxy. One of these ways was to create a clone body of a creature who would become known as Snoke, someone that Palpatine could puppet remotely. From a recent Kylo Ren origin comic, it appears that Snoke had been rapidly deteriorating, probably due to being a conduit for the Emperor's dark side energy and spirit and the like. Then again, maybe it's because he's made of cheese potentially. I'm not really sure, to be honest, because...
a good question for another time.
In addition to that, Kylo Ren thought he was talking to Darth Vader through the use of his grandfather's helmet. Of course, this was also the Emperor bending him to his will.
I have been every voice you have ever heard inside your head.
I'll say this only once. No women, no alcohol, no drugs. Remember that, and we will accomplish our objective.
How was he able to change his voice? Well, you know, I assume Sith magic and the like, but also...
a good question for another time.
All of this cloning bizzo is actually very similar to how he originally returned in the now Legends comic, Dark Empire. This story tells of how he transferred his mind into a clone upon his death. We actually did a recent video on this very story with animations and all, which I'll link at the end and below if you want to check it out. There's still questions though I have regarding his return. Who are those tens of thousands of beings that were hanging out with the Emperor? Do they all have like jobs and apartments and stuff? Do they ever worry about being hit by the constant lightning? Also, was Snoke a physical puppet of the Emperor, or in fact some kind of independent clone that had a copy of his mind? Also, why did the Emperor, in the event of his death, put in place Operation Cinder as seen in Battlefront 2? That plan was essentially to completely devastate loyal Imperial planets and forces upon his death. But why would you go about doing that if you only wanted to return down the line? That seems dumb. It's almost as if The Rise of Skywalker made up a lot of the stuff that happened in it at the very last minute. But then again, who am I to say that? Who is anybody to say that? Because again...
a good question for another time.
There's no doubt, though, more info will be revealed on the specifics of how Palpatine came to be, whether that be in a spin-off comic or book, or whether it be people relentlessly hounding J.J. Abrams about his choices for this movie for the rest of time. But if you have your own ideas about how this happened that fill in any of these gaps, if you could leave a comment, that'd be great. Or better yet, do you think having the Emperor return is a good idea for Star Wars in general? And don't be telling me that this is a question for another day. This is a question for this very day. Anyway, subscribe if you want, because there's a bunch of videos Star Wars related that are on the way. I've got a couple of surprises that I won't spoil here. That's a question for another day. But there is definitively an extensive Easter egg video this Sunday, as well as a spoiler-heavy episode of my podcast, The Weekly Planet, this Monday morning. All that will be linked below. I really recommend you checking out the podcast also. I got so many questions related to this movie. Like, where did Maz Kanata get Luke's lightsaber from? She was like, that's a question for another day, but I feel like now that day has passed. Also, is Finn Force sensitive? Is that how he was able to sense Rey at the end? Also, why wasn't Ben a Force ghost with Luke and Leia? Also, how did that Sith dagger work in terms of locating the holocron? Could you just stand at any point at a distance from the Death Star and kind of hold it up and it would kind of right itself? I'm not really sure what...